Today's topic will be Grand Prix attack main lines. When I say main lines, I mean after starting first moves e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, when you go with bishop e5 and threaten to take on c6 and create those pawn weaknesses in the pawn structure for black, when they go with, in my opinion, the only move, knight d4. It looks like only logical approach to avoid positionally dangerous bishop takes c6. We spoke about that in previous video, and today it's time for the main lines. Of all of the variations and possibilities, I chose short castle here. Although instead of short castle, you can also go what Lawrence Trent mentioned in his video about this variation. He mentioned a4, and he came up with some very interesting and resourceful variations by white in this a4 approach. Apart from a4, there is line that is a little bit forgotten and not that used commonly by white anymore. Knight takes d4. Usually bishop never takes because of some e5, and it's pretty imprisoned in the center of the board after some e5, queen f3. So when they take by pawn, knight e2. You just have to try to take advantage of the d4 pawn in either way, occupying and attacking it, or exchanging it with c3, which basically opens up either bishop c1, bishop a3, or bishop c1, bishop e3 ideas, and you just open up your knight on e2 as well. So I'm not going to show you any of these variations. I'm actually going to show you short castle after knight to d4. And I just have to say that it's considered to be the strongest move, and also it is the most common reaction by white here. So after castle, there are like so many possibilities for black. Black can go with the main line, and the main line is a6. But till we reach a6 and all those possibilities, I just have to show you all other side variations. So let's go. They can play, in my opinion, one of the trickier options, knight h6. I put a yellow color on this knight on h6 because I kind of consider when this existing knight on h6 kind of weak. You play d3, of course, you open up your dark square bishop, and when they play castle, you immediately have to react with f5. It's a move with exclamation mark. I like this one a lot. It opens up the bishop, you sack this pawn, but that's, generally speaking, a very common idea in all these GPA type of positions, especially when knight stands on h6. You shouldn't waste your time. Just kick off with f5 and launch the attack on the king side. What's your plan afterwards? To play like queen e1, queen h4, to weaken the king side and position of the king, generally speaking. And position really looks good and prosperous for white. I'll show you a game of Gurov this opening, Wayne Jones. So his opponent played d5. He captured knight takes d4 and captured this pawn on d5. After knight takes f5, I just have to tell you that at first glance, this looks absolutely fine for black. Although Gawain went a step further, he captured an f5, and after queen d5, put the bishop on a good diagonal with fmp, then captured here, forced black to capture, and played bishop g5. He actually took advantage of inability by black to play any f6. After b5, bishop b3, bishop b7, his opponent still plays, you know, like all these moves pretty smoothly, and I just see that white has to go with a queen g4 to defend mate on g2, rook a to e8. And if you ask me, all these moves look kind of normal for black, and black game looks more or less absolutely fine. So a4. a4 is an interesting move because he just wants to see what is he going to go for. Is he going to go b4, in which case he would just break his pawns and get a good positional game, or a6. After that, Gawain opened up his a file, but he's got no good ideas how to take advantage of this a file. So he played rook a to e1, and after e6 played bishop f6. Since he was threatening h4 and h5, since he played this move bishop f6, which pretty much locked these defensive resources by black, I just have to say that Gawain in this game was much better, and eventually this should be an easy attack for white. All things considered, knight h6 is not such a big problem because you play d3. By the way, whoever plays f5, because lots of guys play knight h6 in order to play f5, and absolutely to oppose all your ideas with queen h4 and knight g5, and especially it doesn't allow you anymore to go with f5, you just go with bishop c4. So you prevent short castle. They have to play e6, but what's the problem here? They're going to finally make short castle, but they just keep weakening dark squares around the king side. So when you play knight takes d4, a typical move. Of course, if c takes, you play knight e2 with a classic queen e1, knight g3, c3 ideas, and so. This guy played bishop d4, king h1, castles, and queen e1, with the idea of a4 to expand on the queen side, to make a shelter for the light square bishop once black wants to do some d5 ideas, stopping and preventing like queen h4 and knight g4, knight f2 ideas, or knight h2. White just looks better. And that's why I like this position. So all things considered, I believe that knight h6 is a suspicious move for black. e6 is a very common move. Lots of people like to do e6. And after e6, I always believe that we should almost immediately go with e5, threatening knight to e4, and jumping with this knight either on d6 or f6. But we also have like a pretty nice control and attack on the c5 pawn. So we now threaten knight e4. Actually, not now. We're going to move the bishop. And by the way, whenever you move your bishop back somewhere, you don't put it back on c4. You don't put it back on e2. You put it on d3. But a little bit later, about concrete ideas of bishop on d3. So after you play e5, they just go with a6. That's the best move. Whoever takes now on b5, of course, they can't stop knight d6. They would have to play bishop f8, in which case you play d4 and they're dead. So they can't play knight b5. If they go with f5, that's a typical reaction in this type of game. You just take, play knight e2, and all of a sudden you kind of isolate this pawn on d4. It's going to be weak. So after queen b6, it's not that important that I actually now threaten to take the bishop and to push d3. So you just have to play bishop d3 in this case, but usually you're always going with this bishop on d3 in order to isolate this pawn on d4 and create like some kind of weakness. And I'll show you a typical plan. They can defend from b3 and bishop b2 unless they play d6. They play d6 in order to open up, force us to take, and open up this bishop and defend pawn on d4. Here, you play a4, expanding on the queen side as well, playing b3 in order to play bishop a3, and after bishop a3, queen c7, queen e1. This queen on e1 gives you a couple of ideas. First of all, it makes e5 harder for black to make. Secondly, I want to play some king h1, knight g1 with removing my knight to f3, where I'm once again going to attack pawn on d4, but I will also control e5 square. And finally, when you play king h1 and knight g1, knight f3, you would open up e file and they wouldn't have possibility to play e5. Here, I hardly believe that they can't play e5 immediately. because we're gonna be able to capture and play king h1 or knight g3 with a fine game. So after rook e8, where they just want to unpin this rook and finally kick off with some move like e5, you just go with h4. I like this. I want to play queen g3, I want to play h5. I keep threatening some d4 pawns, but you know what? I like placing my king on h1, playing rook a to e1, fighting off e5 by black, jumping with my knight back to g1 and playing knight f3. In that case, I would just have an ideal position, and in terms of actually what my position is going to require, I'm going to keep my bishop either on a3 or put it back on b2. You just have a nice position. Then after, instead of f5 move, they can also go with knight e7. For example, if I tell you that I won more than 15 games like this so far, it is going to really help you a lot. By the way, one interesting curiosity about this variation, so far I played it 4 times in my tournament games and I have 4 wins. So after knight e4, c takes d4 and knight to e4. All of a sudden you have like all prospects to attack here, castles, and you play b3. You want to place your bishop to b2. If they go with queen b6, you'll bring your bishop back to d3. That pawn, since the knight is on e4, is going to remain isolated on d4, and all you have to do is just bring your bishop back to d3 to fix the pawn on d4, play bishop b2, play queen e1, queen f2, and capture the pawn on d4 eventually. So if they ever play f5, just to somehow cover the dark squares, you take everything and you have a bishop pair and fantastic dark squares. That happened in a game between Grandmaster Jörg Hickel from Germany and one more guy, and White was of course almost winning already. And in another game that I found here was d5. Knight f6, bishop takes, e takes, and knight f5. I believe 2 GMs played this in Blood's game. Tigran Petrosian from Armenia played this, and he just played bishop a3, won an exchange, and after like g4, bishop f8, queen f3, he was completely winning, and black had no compensation for the given rook, even though they had a knight and a pawn. But look at the pawn on d4, those are double pawns, potentially with king on f8, bad knight on g7, even a great possibility to carry on with the attack afterwards with white pieces. So actually I would go with rook e5, queen f2, and queen takes d4, and white is easily winning here. So they can play this move. We already agreed that after e6 you always have to play e5, and you now want to take on d4, play knight e4. That's what you want to do. So you now threaten to take on d4 and go with knight on e4, because you can't go on immediately knight on e4 because they will take the bishop on b5. That's why players go with a6 and you bring your bishop back to d3. In this position I found like such a big number of games. After bishop d3, by the way, once again I insist, bring your bishop back to d3. Why? Because you want to take on d4. When you take on d4, you will create double pawns. When you create double pawns, you're going to create a potentially weak pawn on d4. When you create a potentially weak pawn on d4, it has to be fixed by this bishop on d3. When you actually take on d4, you want to either jump with your knight on e4, taking advantage of weak d6 and f6, or if they solve that problem, you want to take on d4 and jump with your knight back on e2. When you jump on e2, you're just going to play b3, bishop b2, queen e1, queen f2, and reach the d4 pawn and win the game. So just because of this, they have to decide and opt for some of the next possibilities. Lots of players realize that you threaten knight d4 and knight e4, and they just take on f3. And now they once again realize that you threaten knight e4 and they play d5. Looks like they just stopped our initial idea of playing knight e4. We are not going to take, because if we take, we would open up this bishop. At the moment, bishop looks bad. And here, I would avoid like so many games played by good players who went with e takes d6 and some positions. I would just go with the move that I like so much in these games, b3. What's so special about b3? After b3, I want to play a4. And it's a little bit hard to understand immediately b3 and then a4. I want to play bishop a3 after I play a4. And if you ever defend that with b6, I want to play a5. In that case, I would break your pawns, create weakness on a5 and c5. a5 when you take, or if you can play b5 because I'll take on c5, and that's how I want to go. So I play b3 to play a4 and to play bishop a3. So any b6 to face with a5. And when you play b5 yourself, I go queen f2. All of a sudden you have lots of problems with c5 pawn. You have to play queen c7, and I play knight d1. It's very dangerous to, it's very important to show you the real point of this move. I want to play now a4. When you play like bishop b7, I want to force you to go with b4. If you go with b4, I'll be able to once again break your pawns with c3, capture back by knight, play bishop a3, put a rook on c1, and go after weak pawn on c5. I believe that we spoke about that in the first video about the main lines, where mainly I was talking about the weakness on c5. So after c4, you just go back. But you know what? If I provoke you to play c4, if I kind of undermine your pawns on the queen side, if I give myself possibility to play like this, jump with this knight, for example, on e3 and g4, if I don't know, threaten sometimes to take on c4 and do everything, but I especially like bishop a3 idea, I'm pretty satisfied with my game. Also, my queen can always control these dark squares, which is also very important. But by the way, if you don't like this plan, I'll show you a game and plan by Grandmaster Yul Dachev, certainly, in my opinion, one of gurus of this opening. After queen d6, you just have to play b3, knight e7, and you play bishop to b2. By the way, this is not game of Yul Dachev, this is game of Gwyn Jones. So he's threatening knight e4 to take this queen or bishop. After like bishop d4, king h1, I just want to tell you one thing. It's always useful for us to put the king on h1. So when they give us check, thank you guys for doing that for us, because our king on h1 does even better. So after knight c6, knight e4, queen e7, c3, kicking this bishop away and playing bishop a3. All of a sudden, this guy was confronting with lots of problems because he couldn't play b6 because of knight f6 and taking the knight, or just knight c5, doesn't matter. And when the guy played knight b4, Gawain played rook a to e1, knight d3, queen d3, threatening on c5 again, check, and broke this game with f5. When the guy captured, he played knight f5, played knight d6, threatening rook f7 at the moment, and after f5, killed this guy with bishop f5, e takes f5, and the beautiful finish of the game with the queen f5, because if the queen captures, very nice mating net by white. Hope you enjoyed this game. This was a game between Jones and some 2000 guy in a Commonwealth Championship in South Africa like 10 years ago. Hope you enjoyed this game. And I really like this one. Just because of this, some players after e takes d6 play knight f6 in order not to allow you to play like all these b3 and knight e4 ideas. And now I'll show you idea of Yul Dachev, who played a game against Grandmaster also in Commonwealth Championship like almost 20 years ago. Yul Dachev played b3, which is a classic approach, played bishop b2, and after castle, he played knight a4. He stops this pawn going to b5 or b6, followed by bishop b7 at some point. He also opens up the dark square bishop, which in case of if there is an opportunity, he would certainly going to exchange the dark square bishops, which is eventually going to weaken the dark squares and black's king. Black played knight e5, Yuldachev captured and played bishop e4. He's now getting ready for a little bit better position of knight against bishop in some of these blocking type of structures. After bishop e4, b5, took on d5, played queen c3, won the pawn, and that's how he wins the game. Just because of this, his opponent played knight f6, and after queen e3, threatened the pawn on c5. He can defend it. That's the point of bishop on e4. He had to capture. Bishop d7, knight c3, and it's time to discuss a little bit about this type of a raised endgame. After d6, Yuldachev put his knight on d6, rook f to d8, transposed it there. He keeps provoking these pawns to come forward in order to make them weaker, and now he just weakened the pawn on c5, which is going to be used after he played, just like you see, rook e1, rook e5, and knight b7, taking the pawn on c5. After bishop d7, d3, it's a great idea always in all these type of GPA positions to stop c4 and to basically stop any counter chance by him. So after rook e1, rook c5, bishop d5, rook d2, he now opens up his king to go there, stops any counter by g5, beautifully played by white. By the way, this is one of my favorite games. g3, rook d5 captures, and now kicks away this bishop with c4 and fixing the pawn on c5. After that, he just went afterwards with the rook on e5. So after a3, g5 captured, played rook e5, kind of created like weakness, took by knight, played rook c5, found a way to penetrate into black's game and won this game. This was a typical grandmaster's game. He used all his great endgame skills and of course positional skills in order to win this game. I rarely show you like complete games, but I like this one a lot, and you could have seen not just a great opening, fantastic playing the middle game, and the way he was actually playing in the second phase of that middle game towards the end game was even better. So after bishop d3, since you threaten knight takes d4 followed by knight e4, we've seen what happens if they take on f3. Once again, I suggest you to play either b3, or if you like these games by Gawain Jones and Yuldachev, then take on d6 and carry on with b3 afterwards. So there are guys who at this position play d5. They just see that you threaten knight takes d4 followed by knight e4, and they're just so happy to play d5 because their way of thinking is like, hey, once you take on d6, you would just open up my bishop. No, absolutely. That's absolutely wrong positional decision by black. So when they play d5, you just take on d4. And when you take on d4, they've just created like two type of weaknesses. One is bishop on g7, that after d5, unless they play f6, cannot be open anymore. And another one is fixed pawn on d4. Now you see the point of bringing our light square bishop back to d3. So after knight e2, they have two type of possibilities. They can play f6 to open up at all costs this dark square bishop, where I'm going to show you my game against Mohannispur from, I believe the guy was from Iran. And another guy played queen b6, and this is game of Gawain Jones played against somebody, another GM, but let me just show you these games. Playing against that Iranian international master, he played f6. Looks logical. And while I was playing the game, I was wondering, should I take immediately, in which case I would give him another developing move like knight f6. It would probably give him an easier way of development afterwards with short castle. Maybe he can even defend the pawn. So I decided to sack the pawn, and I played b3. The guy captured and played bishop e5. I played bishop e3, and I believe, by the way, I was threatening rook f8. By the way, the game was played in January 2019 on chess.com. 5-minute game, I believe. And the guy played bishop d6. He now prevented this rook f8 check. I played bishop d6 and decided to take on d4 because I realized that if he plays queen b6, I would defend and play queen e1, and he doesn't have a chance to win this knight on d4 and to take advantage of queen. So he played after knight d4 e5 immediately. I played queen f3. I went for very nice tactics. I went for this check, and I want to develop my rook on e1. After the guy played knight e7, which looks nice, I played queen g3. It's a nice move because it certainly pins this queen on d6, but gives me something more. I'm threatening to win this pawn with rook a to e1. Also, you're unable to push these pawns to e4 any longer. Played king d7, and now I played another nice move, rook a to e1. The guy captured the knight. I played rook f7. I was attacking this knight, and when he played rook e8, I played queen h4, and very soon I managed to win the game because he simply couldn't complete his development even though he was up a piece. d4 was falling, h7 was falling. I believe that I took on h7 and that I took on g6, played some bishop f5 and won the piece back, and with couple pawns more he resigned. This is very interesting. And once again we'll go back to d5. Those who believe that it's going to stop knight e4, actually they make a huge mistake. We take on d4 and play knight e2. And all of a sudden, it turns out that this position is actually very bad for black because bishop on g7 is closed, pawn on d4 is doubled and kind of fixed as a weakness on d4. Showing a game between Dwayne Jones and somebody else, played queen b6, queen e1. It's more accurate than b3 since it goes after d4 pawn, but at the same time successfully fights against f6 ideas. So once again, I'm showing you one game of mine played somewhere. I used the same idea. The guy captured, bishop a3, and after queen d6, now I went for queen h4. This time my opponent defended the pawn on e5, and you know, based on previous game, I just took on d4, went for queen d4. The guy's game on the dark squares simply collapsed. Rook was hanging. The only way to defend is knight f6. The guy immediately resigned. So after queen e1, knight a7, b3 with idea bishop b2 to take advantage of that isolated pawn. And guess what? Gawain played against this game played against Tamas Gelashvili. Gelashvili is one of a famous GMs who always plays these side off beat off variations with the white pieces against Sicilians, and he's one of the guys who's actually has one of the best results against the Grand Prix attack with the Grand Prix attack himself. But this time, Gawain went for bishop e2, knight takes d4, a beautiful tactics. And if knight takes d4, he would just play queen e3 because we take advantage of the a6 being played and queen not being defended on b6. After queen e3, we just won a pawn, and that is, the matter should be, the rest should be matter of technique. After knight b4, queen e3, knight e3, queen d3, bishop d7, threatens bishop e5, queen e3, a5, bishop a3, installing this bishop on e7 and absolutely executing all kinds of counter chances by black. b4, c3, rook f3, going with bishop f6. This guy captured the pawn, but it's too late because Gawain went for mate, played f5, went for queen h6, and Gelashvili couldn't defend his kingside any longer. Once again, greatly played by white. Once again, inability to defend himself properly. Fantastic game. So when we take a look at all these variations with e6 and e5, there is only one possibility by black. And I have to tell you that it's one of the most serious continuations by black in the whole GPA attack. So it's f5. What's so strong about this move? I played one tournament game against Walden in Greece like approximately 15 years ago, and my opponent went for f5. I was very happy when I saw that my opponent went for this e6 line, and I just said, okay, this was going to be another easy game. But when he played f5, I realized he hasn't committed himself with d5, which means that he can always break in the center with d6. When he played f5, he just stopped my knight e4. And I said, if I take on f6, he would recapture by knight and he would have a nice game. Or first take on f3 and then take by knight. So I said, okay, let's go. Let me just take on d4. And after c takes d4, to go with knight e2. Afterwards, in the analysis, I found an improvement over my game. I played knight a4 against some people in blitz, and it went well. But objectively speaking, according to engine analysis, black is better in this position. They will play d6, they will open up bishop on g7, they will bring their knight on f6 in the center, develop the dark square bishop either with b5 and bishop e7, or if you prevent that with a4, they will play bishop d7 and bishop c6. Black looks at least slightly better, if not even more. Just because of this, I would suggest you something completely different here. It's b3. It's my improvement. Even though there is a hardly believable score by white in this line. By the way, white has never won a game out of 10 games, and I even found some games by GMs. After thorough analysis, I'm of opinion that this move is the only one that secures white initiative will look for in GPA. So after b3, they of course break in the center with d6. They want to take on f3 and take on e5. We play bishop a3. It's aimed against knight f3 and taking on e5. So also, I'm opening up the back rank. So if you ever capture in this position, for example, on f3, I would recapture. I'm threatening to take. I'm going to go after the c5 pawn when I take. I'll play rook a to e1. And if you take, I can take. When you take, I can play bishop c5. And I have no more problems. Rook a to e1. I always prefer if I had. I'd prefer if I had my king on h1. But okay, I can, and we can actually even go with this position. This position looks fine for us. After bishop a3, I analyzed some. For example, knight e7. You take on d4 and you take on d6 with a good game. Then I analyzed some queen a5 ideas, threatening this bishop. And when we play bishop e2, at least we managed to remove queen from control of the center, d6 square and d4 square. So after like knight f3, queen f3, d takes. This is another game of mine played on Chess.com. A 3-minute game plus 2 seconds in some title Tuesday. I captured bishop e5 and played rook a to e1. After king h1, once again, thanks to my opponent to give me check, knight f6, I decided to go, I'm down a pawn by the way, I decided to go a little bit crazy with bishop f5. G takes f5, queen f5. In a game that I played, I just went for, my opponent went for castle. I came up with check and played knight e4. And when he played something like rook g8, I captured, played bishop f6 and played rook to e3 followed by rook g3. And you know what? I'm just winning the rook on g7 and position is completely winning for white. So just because of that, they went for queen d8. They should go actually with queen d8. You should exchange a pretty good defender of the dark squares. That's the dark square bishop. Then your knight takes on b2. They go castle. You include check and play knight c4. In my opinion, position is absolutely unclear. Yes, we're down a piece, but we have we have one pawn for the piece. Then they have a pawn that is hanging at a moment on c5, pawn that is hanging on e6, and pretty weak pawn on h7. Also, king's position on h8 is not better either. All things considered, we have a nice compensation here. It looks good for us. So, pretty interesting line. I guarantee that on some medium level, you're going to face lots of games and continuations with e6 by black, and that your games are going to be like real joy and the pleasure once you play e5, because most of these guys are simply not going to have an easy time and will not know these defensive patterns for black. And finally, we just have to go with lines where they go knight b5 before we go into the main line with a6. By the way, if they go with knight f6, you just kick this knight away with a5. You kick it away with a tempi. Knight has to go h5. You bring your bishop back on c4, so you can maybe take on d4 or include your, you even actually threaten some knight g5 or bishop f7, knight g5. They cannot take on f4 because of knight g5, So after d6, knight g5 castles, and d3, this position gives you a typical GPA type of game where you have like lots of chances to attack. And I believe it's time to take a look at serious opportunity for black, and that is actually move knight takes b5. Of all the variations apart from a6, I consider knight b5 as one of the most serious ones. Many times you'll see this one, especially used by weaker guys. To be honest, when I was first time faced with this variation, so when I had to play when I was young against the GPA, I took also on b5. Taking on b5 is bad. Taking on b5 is bad, and let me just make a comparison. Just like in all side variations, when you give up your light square bishop for the knight on c6 and create double pawns, here the only let's just say difference in comparison to those positions is that they don't at least make double pawns on c6 and c5. But absolutely your plan should be the same. So after knight b5, most of your opponents, most of these people will play like a6 and d6. So I'll show you a couple of games and show you how to beat up these guys. After knight b5, the only move is d5. But before we go there, let's just go for a6. Knight c3, d6. Almost everybody will play like this. By the way, I don't want to, I don't want to remind you, if they play 6, you always play 5. You always threaten knight e4. If they play d5, you immediately play d4, and they have lots of problems with these two bishops. It's very important to remember positionally this type of game. You play on the dark squares, you play on a bad light square bishop, you play on a bad bishop on g7. It's very important to remember that. A student of mine, he's almost an IM level, played a tournament game recently like this, and he didn't recognize this d4 idea. He played something queen e1, and then he told me he wanted to play some d3 and b4 ideas. No, you play d4 and you absolutely take control of and take a good grip on d4 with your knight and with your pieces. And after a6, knight c3, d6. You can't even imagine how many games I played like this. You can't even imagine. Probably hundreds of blitz, bullet, rapid, even one tournament game. And I once again have to repeat, I played once with the black pieces and got destroyed in 23 moves. So after d3, knight f6. So what's your plan? Your plan is just to go with queen e1, and when they play castle, go with the queen h4. Are you going to play f5 first, which is initially my suggestion for you, or are you going to go with queen h4? It's the same thing, because they can't play anything to stop f5. So queen h4, this guy played d5. For example, I'll show you a game between myself and Grandmaster Jonathan Tayar, or I'm not sure. So the guy just played b5, I played f5, played bishop e7, I played bishop here. And lots of players play like this. They just learned that they should play on the queen side. They shouldn't care too much about the king side. And this guy is a GM. Was he tired? Did he forget that I could mate him on the king side? That's not my problem. When the guy played b4, I played knight e2, and I just came up with knight g5 and made him afterwards. What actually makes this game even... Okay, it was a blitz game, but still, it's very bad to play like this, like nothing's happening. I just played knight g5, and you know what happened. I just used and applied the idea we spoke many times before. Here, I decided to capture. F takes doesn't work because of knight e6. The guy captured, and guess what happened? I know, if you know one of the most tactical and typical Grand Prix attack ideas, then you wouldn't have much problems finding rook f6, bishop f6, and bishop g7 idea. So many games I won like this. I hope you're gonna be able to finish your opponents off with this variation as well. It's a nice one. Then I'll show you a game between international master Nikolovsky and somebody else. The guy played c4, white played knight g5, queen b6, king h1, knight h5, captured, took on g6, cannot take by f pawn because of knight e6. After this one, played g4, and the guy couldn't play knight f6 simply because of rook takes f6, and if e takes queen h7 mate. If the king takes, then just find a mate for this guy. Usually mate goes with... Can we go rook f1, king g7? This is mate, but if king goes on e5, where is mate? Where is mate? Where is mate? We just have to find it. Worst case scenario, I have checked this one, and I can give you check, and if I don't find mate, I can win the queen, unless we've got something there. All things considered, this knight b5, and a6 or d6 first is absolutely bad. Whoever plays knight f6, I found a game between Serbian GM and another guy who played knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, c takes, queen takes, and just like you see, white had a great development, great activity, and eventually managed to win being up a pawn after a6, queen d5, captured a pawn, played bishop e3, bishop d4, traded off pieces, and with a pawn up, Perunovic beat Simic. So it's time to check real stuff. So when they take on b5, and that's one of the main approaches by black, they have to go with d5. They have nothing else. Once again, any d6, you play d3. Any a6, knight f6, you play your plan. Queen e1, f5, queen h4. But don't play f5 before they play castle. I told you that last time. And when they play castle, it's absolutely the same whether you play queen h4 or f5. But for some reason, I like showing them immediately my intentions and that I just want to kill them with f5, where I open up this bishop, and that they won't be able to stop my plan with typical GPA attack like queen h4, bishop h6, and knight g5. Okay, I don't want to give you anything there. So it's time to analyze like real things there. So when they play knight b5, in my opinion, the only move is d5. There are two approaches by white here. White can take on d5, and I'm not a big fan of this type of positions. All of a sudden, they go into some sort of gambit variation where they just want to open up game for their bishops. I don't like those positions, and when I tried to come up with something nice with the black pieces against GPA, that variation was certainly one of my lines. But there is something that I didn't like for black about that position. It's e5 move. e5 is going to be focused on two types of things. First of all, I just imprisoned this bishop on g7. And second thing, I just want to play d4, fixing the weakness on d5. And basically, when I play d4, I'm going to leave this bishop on g7 forever bad and forever inactive. So after e5, they just have to play... Actually, they can play a couple of moves. They can play a6, they can play d4, and they can go with, I don't know, maybe some bishop g4 or some ideas like this. Let's just say they go with d4. d4, idea is a6, so you can bring your knight back to c3. Also, d4 just stops d4 by white. So black prevents white from playing d4, but prevents d4, but leaves white ahead in development after c3, undermining this pawns. And if they play d3, play b3 with the idea of bishop a3. Here I'm going to show you a game of Hebden, who played in his line and in his game a6 knight a3, and after b5 he came up with this very nice move, knight c2. I don't like when I take on d4 and when I go after the pawn on d4. I don't want to win that pawn, because if I win the pawn on d4, I give their bishops lots of compensation, like bishop b7, queen d5, knight h6, knight f5. I guarantee that black has a very nice compensation in that line. So after knight c2, if they play d takes, you trade the queens off. Why? Because trading of course, if they play like this, you just undermine, jump on d4, take advantage of the dark squares. If they take on d1, for the rest of the game, they will have lots of problems with the pawn on c5 with bishop a3. They will have lots of problems with absolutely undeveloped king side. So that's why I believe that they have to play d3. After knight to e3, now it has to follow by b3, and development of bishop goes to a3 or b2. But let me just show you the game between Hebden and this guy. The guy played knight h6, b3, and knight f5. Looks absolutely logical. Queen e1. I want to capture on e3 by queen and add one more piece against the c5 pawn if that happens. So in the game was a castle, bishop a3. This is an extremely unusual position, but I think white holds some advantage. The pawn on d3 is more likely to be a weakness than a strength, after white has repositioned his pieces. The c5 pawn is also awkward to defend, and black's pawn pushing has not helped his development at all. After like b4, this guy captured, played bishop b4, queen b6, put the bishop back on c3, played queen f2, and the rest of the game was just his realization. So rook f8, rook ac1, a6, played knight e2. He was up a pawn and eventually won this game. What do you have to do in position like this? Just try to trade the dark square. Even though his dark square bishop is bad, try to trade them off and to go into the knight against the bishop, because we're up a pawn, so we should simplify the game. You will, of course, want to play e4 and bring your king to the center, but also, since the game is blocked, you just want knight against the bishop. So, in this variation, if they go with, instead of d4, if they go with a6, that's the main line. But let me just show you what happens if they go knight h6. Immediately d4. And now you shouldn't have any problems. If they play c takes, you take by queen, threatening queen takes d4 followed by knight b5. And another thing is, if they don't take but play a6, you play knight c3. You now threaten d takes c5 to win this pawn. They have to play c4. And now we go queen e1. And this is game of Minasian against another guy played in Spain many years ago. You just go rook f2 to defend, rook e2, and he now played bishop to e3. I like his game, although I have to tell you that after this bishop here, knight d1, bishop h4, he improved the position of his dark square bishop, played bishop f6, which was nice, played e6, which opened up e file and e5 square for his pieces, jumped with the knight, played knight g6, and crushed this guy in a position like this, although somehow this guy managed to make a draw. But doesn't matter, this is like a much better position for white. I just briefly showed you this game. So knight h6, you just play d4. And with d4, you just react in the center and you have a nice position. If they go with, for example, bishop g4, I don't care. I play d4. That's my initial idea, and that's what I want to play. Gwen Jones played a couple of games here, and after like c4, h3, bishop takes, queen takes, a6, knight c3, e6, and b3. b3 opens up my dark square bishop, breaks these pawns, and gives me bishop a3. An interesting game was played between Gawain and his opponent, where Gawain played f5, and after e takes played g4. This is game between Jones and Nguyen in Olympiad 10 years ago, and after queen h4, he took on f5, played queen g4, and eventually managed to win the game. I very much like this game as well, and I like this f5 move in this position, which opened up the bishop on c1, broke this pawn chain on e6 and g6 that looks unbreakable simply, and he came up with this very nice idea of g4, where he took advantage of weak f7 and strong f-file for white. All things considered, they have to play a6. When they play a6, you have to jump on c3. And if they play bishop g4, you play d4. So they have to play d4. You play knight to e4. I'll show you a game of Yuldachev, who's my favorite player of GPA, because he's got a very nice and annoying positional style in these games. He threatens to take on c5. After queen d5, played d3. When the guy played knight h6, by the way, an interesting line happens if b6. Then you just come up with an absolutely new idea in these games. Reminds me on Banco Gambit. It's b4. Breaking on the queen side, and when they take, for example, you just go with either bishop b2 to get a pawn immediately back, or go with a3, which gives you plenty of interesting tactical possibilities. I would go with bishop b2 and get the pawn back on d4. When they play knight h6, you just have to go with queen e1. You threaten knight f6, but idea is very sneaky, because you want to go with that queen on a5 and win the pawn on c5. When castle, you can't play queen f5 because they have some stupid trick with bishop f5. But actually, you now go with a4. Idea is to play a5 myself. When you play a5 yourself, knight f to d2, b6, and Yudachel beat in Commonwealth Championship Harika, one of the best women players in the world. He played knight c4. He played h3 to stop both of these pieces, but especially to point out how weak is this knight. And after queen f2, b3, took on d2, played bishop d2, put the rook on a1, played rook e2, rook f2 e1, and Harika completely forgot about his next possibility. So when she jumped on d5, he broke on the king side with f5. Just like you see, I'm going a little bit deeper than usual with most of these games, because I have to show you that GPA, even in the main lines, is not like only tactical position, but sometimes you just have to follow like a clear positional plans and ideas. It's not just, let's just go with bishop h6, queen h4, knight g5 and mate our opponent. No, it doesn't work like that. Sometimes it's very, very positional. For example, look at this previous game. It's consisted of many subtle moves by white in order to complete his development, and finally he came up with this f5, even though she made a mistake, so position was just a little bit better for white. And then I just have to tell you that I like these b4 ideas. That's a very creative way of breaking those plans. But if you didn't like this plan with d3, a4, b3, and control of the dark squares, then Plasket, grandmaster from England, played queen e2, and after bishop g4, he played d3. After d3, knight h6, h3, bishop f3, queen f3 threatens knight f6 to win the queen. Queen c6 went for g4. Very typical. I don't want to say beautiful, because it's really very typical way of showing how misplaced is this knight on h6, and also kind of restricting this piece. This piece and this knight on h6 is doing nothing anymore. I really have to say the same for the bishop on g7. And finally, they can't play b5, they can't move the knight, they can't move the bishop. If they go castle, you're just going to play bishop d2, rook a2, e1, and f5 and kill them. The guy played f5, e takes, and played f5. This was game by Plaskett and Dodgson, played in England many years ago, but just like you see, white has an upper hand in this type of position. All things considered, this variation is only playable if after knight to d4 they just go with, and after castle they just go with a6. After they do a6, your bishop has to go on d3. I believe by now you should have realized why do we put our bishop back to d3. Our bishop goes back to d3 because once we take on d4, we just want to isolate this knight. Actually, when pawn c5 takes on d4, we want to isolate the pawn on d4, and afterwards we want to attack it. Here, once again, black has a couple of opportunities. They can play d6 and e6. Lots of people make mistake and play e6. They have to play d6. Those who play e6, what's the typical reaction here? Of course, e5. What are we threatening right now? Of course, knight takes d4 followed by knight e4. Just because this position transposes into the line that we analyzed previously, I don't want to go deep with this one once again. But I just want to tell you, and I just want to remind you, we threaten knight e4 and we threaten knight takes d4 followed by knight e4. So they have to play, literally they have to play f5. And if you remember, we already analyzed this previously. And don't take and play knight e2 because that's what I did in one of my tournament games. And it's very interesting fact. Out of 12 or 13 games in the chess base, I'm the only one, and I'm the highest rated player who played this with white. I'm the only one who won, but I have to tell you something. I didn't win because I played so good or whatever. No, actually my opponent outplayed me. I tricked him in a mutual time trouble. So after f5, check out the analysis above and go on b3. You just have to go with b3, and here I told you why do we do with b3 and why do we go like that. We just want to come up with some type of game after we play knight takes d4, knight e2, and bishop a3. Anyways, just because it's transposition into another line, we go with d6. Watch out. Watch out because they threaten bishop g4. There is no room for mistake. We have to take on d4. Once we take on d4, we actually deprive black of a possibility to play bishop g4. After knight takes d4, they have to take by pawn. That's the main line. Although many times I faced this move bishop d4. And here I'll show you a game of, once again, Gawain Jones, once again Yuldachev, and another game of mine played on 5-minute blitz on ICC against a pretty good player. After king h1, this guy against me played b5. He played b5, and I said to myself, I'm pretty sure that when they take by bishop, they've just fixed position of my king and put it into safety. So whoever actually does this bishop d4, put your king on h1 and absolutely consider your position being safe. So my opponent went for b5. I was thinking for a while, but not too much because we all play blitz on intuition, and I said, let's go with e5. I just want to somehow take advantage. Actually, there is a obvious tactical trick. If they take, I'll play queen f3, and I'm going to win on f7 or win the rook on a8. So I was just considering some knight h6, but in that case I said queen f3, bishop e4, and I would just kill my opponent somehow because king is weak, knight is stupid on h6, bishop does nothing on d4, very bad position. After e5, my opponent went for bishop e7. I looked at the position and I said, okay, let me just play. No, actually, this is the best move according to the engine, but I didn't play that. I took on d6. The guy captured by queen, and I played bishop e4. So when rook b8, I captured, played queen f3, played f5, played d3, played bishop h6, and put my rook on e1. I believe that I did like bunch of very logical moves in order to reach slightly better position, and everyone would be able to play like this. It's not a huge problem. So what I'm actually trying to show you here, you don't have to be Magnus Carlsen to play these type of positions. Bishop c3, b takes, queen d5, and queen g3. All of a sudden I started to look at some tactical motifs here, and my opponent fell for them. Look at the rook on b8, look at the pawn on e7, look at the weak dark squares. He took on a2 like nothing was happening. I played rook e2 like nothing was happening as well. But at this moment, I actually realized there was a nice tactical trick, and my opponent fell for it. I was threatening queen f6. I would even threaten if the rook was on d8, queen f6. He played knight h5. I played g4. He played rook d5, and I played queen c7. He couldn't defend everything, and he simply resigned. This was a nice game, pretty good blitz game. I checked in on the engines. I played a pretty solid game there. But generally speaking, once again, bishop d4 helps absolutely, doesn't help black at all. Maybe it gives them one tempi, but believe me, we're not talking about a useful tempi. If we're talking about a useful tempi, it's for us, not for them. Why? Because we usually exchange these knights. Secondly, they go with this bishop right into the middle of the board. So in my opinion, they have to play bishop goes back to g7, at least if they take on d4. But if they do that, then they waste time. So after king h1, what happens if they play bishop g7? I'll show you a game of Yuldachev. The guy played queen f3, stops any b5 because of e5, threatens f5. So after knight f6, Yuldachev played e5. I like this one. Cannot capture because f7 would be hanging, of course. So after knight g4, played bishop c4, d takes, and came up with the nice tactics. F takes e5, knight f6, played knight e4, won that one, and after bishop d2, knight f6, rook f3, rook e1, just like you see, rook f7 doesn't work because of bishop h6. The guy played king g8, and after bishop h6, rook e3 resigned. He couldn't stop rook e8 checkmate after rook f7 or rook g7 with doubling of the rooks along the 7th rank. Yuldachev Grigoryan played in Uzbekistan back to 1996. After exploring all these variations, we just have to go with d6. d6 is the main line. We have to go with knight d4, c takes d4. So they don't go and they don't take with the bishop on d4. So after knight e2, it's important position. It's one of the crucial positions here. And here we just have to understand the basics of this game. There are like so many possibilities by black here. They usually go with e6, knight e7. They go with knight f6 like nothing's happening. And they just go with some knight h6 moves. I played a tournament game against one of the strongest young players in Serbia. He's 17 years old and GM already, but I just have to once again brag around and to say that I won that game. My opponent played knight h6. By the way, whoever plays e5, because I found out that many guys went for this e5 here, trying to say that this is a nice position. You just go with pretty nice and easy game by Gawain Jones against Zhou. So you take, you play bishop c4, you play d3, bishop c4 to improve your light square bishop and go after a weakness on f7 and open f-file. When they play knight f6, you play d3, you play queen e1, bishop d2 threatening bishop d6. I believe queen d6 was a mistake, by the way. bishop b3, a4 playing on both sides. That's what I like about Gawain's games in the system. He plays on both sides at the same time. And then he played rook f3 and rook a to f1. This was a rapid game in 4 NCL league in England. Jones was winning, and of course eventually he crushed this guy. In my game, my opponent played knight h6. I usually, okay, it's worth of considering, but I usually teach you that this knight doesn't belong there. I won my game playing f5, but let's be honest, I didn't have like such a good position, and I won game because I just managed to outplay him afterwards in the middle game and especially in the end game, rather than showing anything that's special in this game. So I analyzed this position after knight h6, and even though I played f5, trying to exclude this knight, staying there forever on h6, he didn't play that. He played knight h6, knight g4, knight f4, knight e5, and when I played knight d5, he captured, and we played a very weird type of position. Don't ask me how did I manage to win this, but somehow I did manage. Problem is, after knight h6, I believe is b3. b3 gives us a very interesting possibility, bishop b2. And now a very important move is coming, knight g3. What's so important after knight g3? It's aimed against e5, because any e5 it is going to face with f5. And all of a sudden we're going to have a very strong attack on the king side. So I think this is great position, and I think that this is exactly the way we're supposed to go against knight h6. And just like you see, sometimes we go with b3, sometimes we go with some other typical ideas, but usually when you make king h1, when you move like b3, when you make a move like f5, you can hardly make mistakes in a Grand Prix attack. Also, there is one more sideline, it's e6. And this line, knight goes on e7, and they shouldn't have any problems with the d4 pawn. They just want to develop this knight on e7, sometimes play f5, sometimes play knight c6, but that shouldn't be a big problem. I'll show you a game playing correspondence chess between a very strong player and weaker guy with the black pieces. The guy put the king on h1. Always take this measure of precautions, and also this is a very useful move. Knight e7, b3. Another very typical move to give us bishop b2 and to go after the pawn on d4. Castles bishop b2, and now you can't play e5 because of f5. You can play e5 because I'm not even forced to play f5. I can play just c3 and break in the center. Queen b6. Can you recognize similarities between this game and game between Gawain Jones and Tamás Gelashvili? Queen on b6, unprotected, weak pawn on d4. So queen e1. By the way, don't forget, if knight c6, I believe that in that game it was something similar to this one, queen f2, and you just play c3. And just because the queen on b6 is hanging, you're about to win the pawn on d4. So after queen e1, they have to play f5. After they play f5, I'm just jumping with the knight on g3. After bishop d7, take a look how white took advantage of this knight on g3. Took on f5. In my opinion, the only move was knight f5. Knight f5, getting rid of this potentially weak knight on g3. And after g takes f5, rook to f3. White wants to go with queen f2. Maybe I even want to go with rook g1 and g4. I also want to place my rook on g3 and h3, and there is some attack in the air for white. In this game was g takes f5, which I didn't like at all, and now bishop c4 was one of the crucial moves. I like it so much because it went after the pawn on e6 as potential weakness. Rook f6 doesn't work because knight h5 would be devastating, so they have to play d5. And when you play d5, it's not a problem. But now we've just created like an even worse weakness on e6. It's a backward pawn, and d4 looks even more isolated without proper defense of e5 pawn. So after knight c6, knight h5, bishop h6, and this guy went with g4. All of a sudden, a new idea has just opened up, it's g4 with a rook g1 with a kingside attack. After rook a to e8, g5, bishop g7, rook g1 with idea g6, took on g7, played queen e5, and black resigned. A beautifully conducted attack and initiative by white ever since he played that king h1 and b3 plan. And finally, if you play knight e2 and they play mainline knight f6, I'm going to teach you to play king h1. King h1 is such an important move. It's a simple sidestepping move with the idea of being able to take on d4 afterwards. Although, I just have to show you one more interesting game played Balashov, grandmaster from Russia, who came up with a very nice game against some guy 20 years ago. This guy played queen b6. Balashov went with king h1. I don't have to explain you this move anymore. Castle, queen e1, knight d7. Balashov put his queen on the king side, queen h4, and after bishop f6, somehow there is like some sort of disharmony with, speaking of black pieces. Bishop on f6 doesn't look good. Queen on b6 doesn't look special. This knight blocks the bishop on c8. I don't like it. Played knight c5, and he actually put all his hopes and actually onto this bishop on d3. But after bishop e2, knight d3, c takes d3. d4 is hanging. Only move was e5. Bishop on f6 is hanging. Only move is bishop e5. He took on d4 and won the game. Why did I show you this game? Because I just want to show you that not always in these variations you have to remember moves by heart. Actually, in GPA, if you understand most of these plans and ideas, you can absolutely relax and feel free to play without any theory. Why do I like that approach so much? Because it's not based on remembering all these variations by heart, but basically you're just going to have very deep and strong understanding of these lines, and you would be able to play them always in bullet, in blitz, rapid chess, tournament games. You would be able to teach somebody how to play this opening successfully. So that's why I showed you b3. But speaking of theoretical lines, king h1 is the best move. And after king h1, there are following variations. King h1 is aimed against short castle. Short castle is not the best. Once again, we go to guru of this opening, Gawain Jones, who took on d4, and after knight e4 played bishop e4. And after bishop d4, I played this game quite a big number of times against even very strong GMs, 2700 guys, on ICC. So I played queen f3 to stop d5 and to threaten pawn on b7. Most of these guys always go with rook b8. And when I play c3, bishop g7, I play f5. It's important not to allow them to play f5 themselves. And here, in one of those really like out of numerous of games that I played in this line, I went with f5. b5 happened in a game of Jones or Minasian against somebody, but I can't remember exactly. After f5, we just want to stop f5 by themselves. And believe it or not, this f5 move gives you a very good prospects to attack afterwards. After f5, black goes with b5, with idea b4, using some sort of minority attack. But let me actually show you what one 2700 guy played against me on ICC. He played 2 times against me d5 here. d5 going after this bishop I took, and he captured by bishop on f5. I'll be honest with you. First game that I played against him, I took on b7, and after queen d3, I was in a very bad situation, and I lost that game. Then I simply analyzed this game and realized that I should play d4. I played d4, and afterwards I had a very nice game. Because I was the one who was leading up the initiative in this game, and I came up with some bishop g5 and rook a to e1, and then I even managed to win that game. The computers and Anjas showed that e5 is the only move in order to stop bishop g5 and rook a to e1 as the main idea for white. So after like e5, d takes, bishop e3. White looks a little bit better. And all we have to look here is a pawn majority that we have on the queen side. Position is tiny better for white, but okay, if we talk about advantage here, it certainly should be only in white's favor, not on the black side. And finally, for those who play rook b8, c3, bishop b7, f5, and b5 followed by b4, look at this game. I like it so much. It's very common in practice because people usually don't recognize the point of this king h1. So after like b4, bishop g5, very nice move that comes with a tempi with rook a to e1, b takes, and very nice position because they can do much here. So if b takes c3, I played one more game on ICC against somebody who played e5. I captured, played rook a to e1. This guy played bishop f6. I played bishop h6, then exchanged and played bishop to b3. I was a little bit better. I was the one who had initiative here and eventually managed to win. It's really better position because of these two strong pawns in the center, potentially weak f7 square, and definitely his king is a little bit weaker. Of course, our king is absolutely safe. I'm showing you a game between Minasian and Arahamia. Rook b5 she played, and after a4, rook a5, g4, queen c7, rook a to e1, played f6, captured there, and after this played queen f6 with amazing attack. He won an exchange and eventually won the game. Game was played 20 years ago, but it's one of those, let's say, model games. And once again, I'm going to repeat. This game, and this should show you why shouldn't they play castle after we play king h1, because lots of players don't simply feel that we want to take on d4 because they don't know the continuation. Knight e4 is the only move, otherwise they're down a pawn. Bishop e4, bishop d4, queen f3, otherwise they will play d5. So they have to play rook b8. We're attacking this bishop. We play f5 in order to open up the dark square bishop and to play d4, bishop g5, and rook a to e1. It's a very nice position, gives you simple, very simple plans, gives you very simple type of playing afterwards, followed with the bishop g5 and rook a to e1, and white is so much better. All things considered, I found in lots of articles that black should play e5. And yes, that's the right approach by black. And by the way, that's what I teach my students when I teach them how to play against the Grand Prix attack with the black pieces. It's nice. You defend this pawn on d4 forever. You open up your light square bishop, and they can't play any f5 afterwards because of some d5 in the center. Whoever plays bishop c4, you just take on e4, and after f takes e5, you play d5 and you take on e5 and you don't have any problems. So after e5, only move for white is c3, breaking these pawns. If d takes, you have d takes, and then you have a nice position. You have f takes e5 followed by g5. You have f5 with pretty much typical ideas on the king side and about the attack. Just because of this, after e5, c3, all computers will show you that castle is the best move. Even though they say castle is the best move, we should take on d4. And after this, play move bishop c2. I just want to play d3, first of all, to defend my pawn on d3, on e4 better. And I just want to carry on developing myself. So when they play, they can play so many moves, like rook e8, d3, bishop, we're threatening to take, they play bishop g4, we just go with h3, and we're just better with the bishop pair. Just because of that, I found like a couple of games with knight g4, h3, knight a3, bishop e3, and you play d4. And then you just go and pick up this pawn on e3. They have bishop pair, but we were up a pawn and we should be once again a little bit better. People like to play bishop d7 against bishop c2. You play d3, knight g4, threatening knight a3 to win the bishop pair, threatening queen h4. we just kick this knight away with a pretty much same idea. If you jump like on e3, we take, go d4, play rook f3 and pick this pawn, and we're just so much better. And just because of this, they have to go queen h4. When they go queen h4, you just go king g1, and now you once again tell them, okay, move this knight. When you move this knight, I take, go d4, and I'm gonna go and pick this pawn eventually on a3. When we take a look at all these possibilities, if somebody is on GM level and if somebody is so good, he has to play d3. Do you know who is going to play d3 against you? No one. So after bishop d3, so why? For the sake of development, better development for Blackhand initiative, he sacrifices this pawn. Bishop d3, rook e8, knight g3, and now there are two moves, h5 or bishop g4. We now just go too deep. I don't think you'll need this anyways, but if h5, let me show you one correspondence game, f5, and if h4, knight e2, and if h3, crazy, you play knight f4, h takes, knight g2, they go like this, and then turns out that when you cover your king with bishop e2, bishop f3, when you put your another bishop on b2, when you put a rook on g1, even you can end up attacking this position, and turns out that king on h1 is just better than king on g8. Interesting line. And there is one more game. In case of knight g3, bishop g4, queen e1, you just want to play h3, queen f2, f5. I am not claiming that this position could be like perfect for white. We're up a pawn. For the given pawn, we just want to be able to somehow either defend us or come up with some potential attack. But believe me, after rook c8, objectively speaking, position is very, very difficult if black knows how to take advantage of initiative. And finally, after all these variations, I've been talking all this time, after king h1, what happens if they play knight d7? Knight d7 defends pawn on d4 and goes naturally with this knight on c5, fighting up the bishop on d3. So I know that knight c5 looks very annoying, but you don't have to panic. We're just going to play b4. There is also a possibility to play b3, but don't worry. So this multi-purpose move, first of all, with his d-pawn blocked, white cannot develop the c1 bishop on c1 h6 diagonal, so plans to move it to b2 and to go after the d4 pawn. It also stops black playing his knight of c5, where it could keep terrorizing this bishop on d3. So after like queen b6, I like the idea of Baccarat played against, actually Baccarat played this with black pieces, a3. Very calm move. I just defend my pawn on b4. When I defend my pawn on b4, I stop knight c5. I keep this pawn on d4 isolated, and I just go with bishop e2. When you play a5, if e5, thank you. Now I go queen f2 or queen h4, I'll go f5. I'm gonna go with c3, undermining this pawn on d4 and along this diagonal with the bishop on b2. When they play a5, I go h3. Why h3? I'll show you a little bit later. Because at some point when they move the knight, you stop knight g4, bishop g4. So after a takes, rook a1, queen a1. All of a sudden, weak pawn. They take, we take. Now I'm threatening knight c6 with bishop g2, knight e7, or knight c6, bishop g7. They play, if queen d2, you have a very nice tactics, knight f5. You can analyze this at home. If they don't do that, but play knight c5, you just go with bishop c3. Slightly better game, good development, good control of a1, aj diagonal, possibility to take advantage of weak pawn on b7. That all these things just make this position a little bit better for white. And finally, if you play this multi-purpose move b4 and they go castle, we play bishop b2 and they go queen b6. This plan was introduced by Wishy Anand against Michael Adams in their match for world champion in, I believe, for the FIDE title. It was played like almost 20 years ago, and I remember at that time Adams at some point, after rook b1 of course, so he can't touch the pawn on b4 because of bishop d4. so you indirectly defend this pawn on b4. This guy played knight b8. I analyzed lots of times e5 here. e5 should never be good. You can always, when e5, because bishop on g7 doesn't directly defend the pawn on d4, you can break it with c3. But also, you can on any e5 play f5 with a great attack and capturing by rook, bringing your knight to g3 and having a great attack. So after e takes, you can even take by knight, go knight g3 and storm all your pieces on the king side and mate the guy. And finally, after rook b1, what happens when they play knight b8? It's a very typical maneuver. Knight goes to c6, wants to defend on d4, and wants to open up this bishop that can maybe go on g4. I analyze this position, and there is a very interesting improvement that happened in a one correspondence game. So it's f5. Very, very nice move. This might be an improvement over the game between Michael Adams and Wei Xianen. So what do? White knight is going to take advantage of the f5 square, so I'm threatening knight f4 followed by knight e5. Also, I'm pretty much looking for the d5 square to take that fantastic grip and outpost for my knight. And finally, it also shuts off this bishop on c8, and it can't go anymore to g4, where it could be exchanged for our good knight. That is a pretty annoying piece against pawn on d4, but at the same time it stops knight f4 and knight e5. After f5, this guy played knight c6, and now a move that I like very much, a3. And here I'm just going to end up this lecture with the following beautiful attack and game by white. The game was played between some 2,400 guys in correspondence chess. Approximately it's like 2,600 in real chess, because they can use computers, engines, books, everything. And let me just show you what happened. After bishop d7, guy played rook f3. When I saw this rook f3 move, I was like, what the hell is happening here? Actually, the idea was, believe it or not, queen f1. I also like bishop c4, fixing your light square bishop and placing it on a good diagonal. Also threatening f takes g6, where when we force them to take by h pawn, then you have easy queen e1, queen h4. e6, f6, bishop h8, queen e1. This is typical Grand Prix type of position for white. You want to go queen h4, slide your rook along the third rank, and use the rook lifting, rook f3, rook h3. After rook f3, in case of knight e5, you have bishop d4, so they can play that. Rook ac8, queen f1, queen c7, rook g3, b5, queen f2, going after the d4 pawn. In case of queen b6, rook h3, now queen is gonna go onto this square. So after bishop f6, play the beautiful move rook f1. Why do I say beautiful? Because he sacrificed an exchange for rook g6, for the dark square bishop. He weakened king side so much. d4 was weak, only move was e5. Then he broke that, and with the bishop pair, with a strong outpost d5, with, of course, possibly weak king and potentially weak squares on the king side, especially dark squares, white managed to win this game. Let me just show you like a couple more moves, what happened there, and that's it. After rook f7, knight e5, f6, I just have to ask you, so what's the only weak piece in white's position? It's the light square bishop. Let's do something with it. Bishop e2, bishop g4, trade it off. Look at this monster on d5. Then this guy realized, what's the only weak piece now? It's the dark square bishop. So let's do something with it now. Bishop c1, it went on h6, and afterwards he played bishop g7, and since the king on h8 was potentially weak, he managed to win this game. Well, after a while, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I did my best. I tried to explain you everything. It took not a bit longer. It took a lot longer than I expected, but that's the way it is. Hope you enjoyed, and good luck with the GPA in the future. Bye-bye.